This will quiet your mind in a way nothing else has. What you're about to hear has helped millions find the rest their thinking can't give them, and it works differently than anything you've tried before. 12 ancient Buddhist stories that unlock something your mind already knows how to do but has forgotten: how to stop exhausting itself. A monk who found enlightenment through sweeping because he was too simple to understand philosophy. A centipede who forgot how to walk the moment it started thinking about walking. A woman who lost everything in one day and discovered freedom in the ruins. A teacher who answered the deepest question with complete silence. These stories do what meditation instructions can't. While you listen, your racing thoughts settle on their own. Not because you're trying to calm them, because ancient wisdom works on the tired mind in ways effort never will. This works even if you've never meditated, even if your mind never stops, even if every relaxation technique has failed you. The Buddha said, "The mind is difficult to subdue, ever swift, seizing whatever it desires. A tamed mind brings happiness." In the next 3 hours, you'll discover how, not through force or discipline, but through stories that let your exhausted mind finally rest. As these stories unfold, you'll feel the shift happening. Your breathing will deepen. The tension in your body will release. That exhausting mental noise will finally quiet down. Get comfortable now. Let your body settle completely. Take one full breath in and let it go. Your rest begins here. In the mountains of ancient China, there stood a monastery where scholars came to study the deepest teachings of Chan Buddhism. The halls echoed with debates about emptiness, discussions of sutras, analysis of koans that had puzzled monks for centuries. Intelligence was currency here. Quick minds were celebrated. The sharper your understanding, the more respect you commanded. Among these brilliant students lived a young monk, the others called Simple Hui. Not to his face, they weren't cruel, but behind his back, with a mixture of pity and exasperation, that's what they whispered. Simple Hui. Because no matter how the teachers explained the Dharma, no matter how many times the abbot broke down complex ideas into smaller pieces, Hui simply couldn't grasp them. When the master taught about the nature of emptiness, the other monks nodded with comprehension, asked penetrating questions, demonstrated their understanding through eloquent responses. Hui sat in the back, his face twisted in confused concentration, unable to follow even the basic thread of reasoning. When they studied the Heart Sutra, memorizing its verses and unpacking its meaning, the others recited flawlessly after a few repetitions. Hui stumbled over the words, mixed up the lines, forgot what he'd just heard moments before. The abbot watched this young monk struggle for months. He saw Hui's genuine effort, the way he showed up to every teaching session, the sincerity in his eyes, even when understanding eluded him completely. Other teachers suggested perhaps monastic life wasn't Hui's path. Maybe he should return to his village, take up a trade more suited to his abilities. But something made the abbot pause. One morning, after Hui had failed yet again to grasp a teaching that even the newest students understood easily, the abbot called him aside. "Hui," he said gently, "I'm giving you a different practice." The young monk's face brightened with hope. Perhaps this new practice would finally be something he could understand. "You will sweep the courtyard," the abbot continued. "Every morning at dawn, you will sweep the stones clean. Just this. Nothing more." Hui bowed, accepting this task. He assumed it was temporary, a simple duty, while the abbot figured out how to help him learn the real teachings. But days became weeks, weeks became months, and still, his only instruction remained the same. Sweep the courtyard. The other monks studied increasingly complex texts. Hui swept stones. They sat in profound meditation, cultivating states of deep absorption. Hui swept fallen leaves. They engaged in Dharma combat, testing their understanding against each other's insights. Hui swept away the morning dew. Years passed. The brilliant students came and went, many achieving recognition for their understanding, some leaving to teach at other monasteries, a few giving up when the practice became too demanding. Hui remained, sweeping the same courtyard, following the same simple instruction he'd received a decade ago. 20 years became 30. 30 became 40. The young monks who arrived now had never known a monastery without Hui and his broom. He was simply part of the landscape, the simple one who swept, who couldn't understand the teachings, who had found his place, doing a task anyone could do. But something had happened during those 40 years, something none of the scholars noticed because they were too busy analyzing, discussing, and debating to see what was right in front of them. We had stopped trying to understand, not from giving up, from something else entirely. When you sweep the same stones for 40 years, thought eventually exhausts itself. There's nothing new to figure out about sweeping. The mind, finding no puzzle to solve, no concept to grasp, no achievement to pursue, simply quiets down. His hands knew exactly how to hold the broom. His body knew the rhythm of the strokes, without his mind directing each movement. The morning air, cool against his skin, the sound of bristles against stone, the way light changed as the sun rose higher. These things required no intellectual understanding. They simply were, and he was simply there with them, sweep after sweep after sweep. One morning, the abbot, now very old, his hair completely white, stood watching Hui work. The rhythm was perfect, unhurried, complete. Each stroke received the same attention whether anyone was watching or not. No thoughts of finishing quickly. No thoughts of doing it correctly. No thoughts at all. Just sweeping, perfect, and whole unto itself. "We," the abbot called softly. The monk looked up, broom still in hand, present and alert, without the slightest confusion in his eyes. "Tell me," the abbot said, "what is the meaning of Bodhidharma coming from the West?" This was the great koan, the question that had stumped scholars, the test that separated true understanding from intellectual cleverness. The young monks who'd studied for years could offer elaborate answers full of references and reasoning. But Hui, who'd never understood a single teaching, who couldn't grasp even the simplest Dharma talk, Hui simply lifted his broom slightly and smiled. In that gesture, the abbot saw what 40 years of sweeping had accomplished. Hui hadn't learned about no mind from texts or lectures. He'd lived it, breathed it, embodied it through the simple act of sweeping stones until there was no one left who was doing the sweeping. Just sweeping itself, happening perfectly, completely, without the exhausting interference of a mind trying to understand or achieve or become. The old abbot bowed deeply to his student. The other monks, watching this, were stunned. Their master, bowing to simple Hui, the one who'd never grasped a single teaching. But the abbot understood what they didn't, that intellectual understanding and direct experience are entirely different things. One exhausts the mind with endless concepts. The other lets the mind rest in simple presence. The Buddha once taught, "Wonderful, indeed, it is to subdue the mind, so difficult to subdue, ever swift, and seizing whatever it desires. A tamed mind brings happiness." But here's what the scholars miss. You don't tame the mind by thinking about taming the mind. You tame it by giving it something so simple, so complete, so utterly without complexity, that it has nothing left to grasp at, nothing left to figure out, nothing left to do, except finally rest. This is why Hui succeeded where brilliant students failed. They were trying to understand their way to freedom. He was simply sweeping. They filled their minds with concepts about emptiness. He emptied his mind by giving it 40 years of the same simple task. They knew all about meditation, could describe the stages of concentration, could debate the fine points of practice. He just swept, and in that sweeping, found what all their knowledge pointed toward, but couldn't deliver. Your own mind is probably doing right now what those scholar monks spent their lives doing. Trying to figure things out, analyzing, comparing, evaluating, planning. Listening to these words while simultaneously thinking about them, judging whether this story is useful, wondering if you're understanding correctly, checking whether you're relaxing the right way. This is the peculiar trap of human consciousness. We think about our thinking. We watch ourselves experiencing. We evaluate our own evaluations. Right now, part of your mind is probably monitoring how relaxed you are, which immediately makes you less relaxed because monitoring requires mental effort. Another part is judging whether you're getting it, which creates distance from actually experiencing anything directly. Another part is already planning what comes next, which pulls you out of this moment entirely. This recursive loop, thinking about thinking, watching yourself think about thinking, judging your watching of your thinking, consumes enormous energy. It's like running a computer program that does nothing except monitor itself, monitoring itself, endlessly. No wonder you're exhausted. The thinking mind trying to solve the problem of thinking is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. More thinking doesn't quiet thinking. It just creates more to think about. More analysis doesn't stop analysis. It becomes another thing to analyze. More techniques for calming the mind just give the mind more techniques to worry about doing correctly. But here's what Hui discovered. Through 4 decades of sweeping, your body already knows how to rest. It doesn't need instructions or understanding or techniques. When you give it something simple enough, concrete enough, immediate enough, the thinking mind has nothing to grab onto. It can't analyze sweeping for 40 years because there's nothing there to analyze. It can't figure out the right way to sweep because there's just sweeping happening, complete in itself. This isn't about becoming simple or giving up intelligence. It's about recognizing that intellectual understanding and direct experience are different paths, and sometimes the smartest thing the thinking mind can do is stop trying to think its way to peace. Those brilliant scholar monks knew everything about Buddhism. They could explain emptiness, discuss non-attachment, describe meditation states with precision. But knowing about rest and actually resting are not the same thing. Knowing about freedom and being free are entirely different. And sometimes, perhaps most times, the direct path is the one that bypasses knowing altogether. When your mind stops trying to figure everything out, something remarkable happens. Not dramatic, not special, just the quiet recognition that you don't need to understand everything to experience it fully. You don't need to analyze peace to feel it. You don't need to master rest to rest. You just need to stop making it complicated. Hui spent 40 years with a broom, and in that simplicity, found what decades of complex study couldn't deliver. What's your broom? What's the simple, immediate, utterly non-complex thing your thinking mind has been overlooking because it seems too ordinary to matter? Maybe it's the rhythm of your breathing right now. Maybe it's the weight of your body against whatever surface holds you. Maybe it's the simple fact of being here, listening, without needing to understand or achieve or become anything different than what you already are. The brilliant students thought Hui was too simple to understand the teachings. They were wrong. He was too simple for the teachings to complicate. And in that simplicity, in that 40-year sweep of stones with no one there trying to get somewhere, He found what all their complexity was pointing toward, but could never quite reach. But what if even the body's wisdom seems distant? What if you can't feel that natural intelligence that knows how to rest without being taught? The next story shows what happens when we lose touch with the automatic grace we were born with, and what that loss reveals about the thinking mind's interference. There once lived a centipede who moved through the forest floor with effortless grace. 100 legs working in perfect harmony, flowing like water over rocks and roots and fallen branches. She never stumbled, never hesitated, never needed to think about which leg should move when or how to coordinate the intricate dance of all those tiny feet. Her body simply knew. One morning, as she crossed a sun-dappled path, a toad sitting on a nearby stone watched her move with obvious fascination. The toad had 4 legs, simple enough to manage, but watching this creature with so many limbs moving in flawless coordination filled him with curious wonder. "Excuse me," the toad called out. "I hope you don't mind my asking, but I've been watching you move, and I'm absolutely amazed. How on earth do you manage all those legs? Which one do you move first? How do you keep track of them all? How do you know which leg goes forward when?" The centipede stopped. For the first time in her life, she considered the question. How did she manage all those legs? Which one did move first? She'd never thought about it before. She looked down at her many feet, suddenly aware of each individual leg in a way she'd never been before. "All right," she thought. "Let me figure this out. I'll start with the front right leg, or should it be the front left? And then, which one comes next? The one directly behind it, or the one on the opposite side?" She tried to move forward, but now her mind was directing traffic. Front right leg. Go. Wait. Now which one? The second right? The first left? She attempted a step, and several legs moved at once, while others remained frozen, creating an awkward stumble. She tried again, thinking harder, concentrating more intensely on the sequence. If the front right goes first, then logically the second left should follow, then the third right, creating a diagonal wave pattern, or is it supposed to be sequential pairs? Her legs tangled together. She lost her balance and collapsed in a confused heap of limbs. The toad hopped closer, concerned. "Are you all right? I didn't mean to cause any trouble." The centipede lay there, utterly paralyzed, her mind racing through calculations and sequences and patterns, trying desperately to figure out consciously what her body had done automatically for her entire life. The more she thought about it, the more impossible it seemed. 100 legs. How had she ever managed them all? This is what happens when thinking enters what the body already knows how to do. Your body performs miracles every moment without asking your mind for permission or instructions. Your heart beats roughly 100,000 times each day, adjusting its rhythm without you deciding when to speed up or slow down. Your lungs breathe in, perfect response to your oxygen needs. None of this requires your thinking mind's involvement. In fact, your thinking mind couldn't manage these processes even if you wanted it to. The complexity would overwhelm you instantly, just like it overwhelmed the centipede. But we do this all the time with things the body knows how to do naturally. A musician practices until her fingers know exactly where to go, the music flowing through her hands without conscious thought. Then she performs in front of an audience, and suddenly she's thinking about each note, watching her fingers, evaluating her playing, and the natural flow stutters and breaks. Have you ever been walking downstairs and suddenly become conscious of the process? You start thinking about each step, where to place your foot, how to shift your weight, and immediately you become clumsy, almost stumbling over something you've done thousands of times without any difficulty. This is what your thinking mind does to rest. The Buddha taught this when he said the trained mind and untrained mind operate completely differently. The untrained mind constantly interferes, inserting commentary, demanding control, trying to manage what doesn't need managing. The trained mind knows when to step back and let natural intelligence work. Your body knows how to rest. It's been doing it since before you were born. In the womb, you rested. As an infant, you rested without trying, without techniques, without instructions on how to do it correctly. Rest is as natural to your body as breathing, as heartbeat, as the constant renewal of cells. But then your thinking mind gets involved. Am I relaxing correctly? Should I focus on my breath or body sensations? Is this the right position? Am I falling asleep or staying present? Should I be doing something different? Each question pulls you further from the natural rest your body already knows how to do, inserting mental commentary into an automatic process, creating the same paralysis that stopped the centipede from walking. This isn't about your body being more intelligent than your mind. It's about recognizing that different tasks require different kinds of intelligence. Your thinking mind excels at solving novel problems, planning future actions, analyzing situations that require conscious reasoning. But it's terrible at managing the countless automatic processes your body handles perfectly on its own. When you try to think your way into rest, you're asking the wrong tool to do the job. It's like trying to use a hammer to paint a picture. The tool isn't wrong. It's just not designed for that particular task. The centipede couldn't walk because she was using analytical intelligence to manage something that required somatic intelligence, the wisdom embedded in the body itself, the knowing that exists without thought, without words, without conscious understanding. You have this same wisdom. It's there in every breath you're taking right now, without deciding to breathe. It's there in your heartbeat continuing steadily without your permission. It's there in the way your body maintains its temperature, repairs its injuries, knows when it needs food or water. All of this happening perfectly, constantly, without your thinking mind's involvement. Rest works the same way. When you stop asking your thinking mind to manage it, when you stop trying to figure out the right way to do it, when you stop analyzing whether you're doing it correctly, your body remembers what it's always known. How to let go, how to release, how to simply be without working at being. The toad's innocent question paralyzed the centipede, not because the question was wrong, but because it pulled conscious attention into a process that works best without conscious attention. Your own mind does this constantly, pulling conscious attention into automatic processes, inserting analysis into natural flow, demanding understanding where simple doing is enough. But here's what the story reveals. The centipede wasn't actually broken when she couldn't walk. Her legs still worked perfectly. Her body still knew exactly what to do. The only thing blocking her natural movement was the thinking mind's insistence on understanding and controlling what had always worked fine without understanding or control. The moment she stopped trying to figure it out, the moment she let her analytical mind step back and her body's intelligence take over again, she walked. Not because she learned anything new, not because she finally understood the correct sequence, but because she stopped interfering with what her body already knew. Your tired mind isn't tired because something is wrong with you. It's tired because it's been trying to consciously manage things that work better without conscious management. It's been trying to think its way into states that emerge naturally when thinking stops trying so hard. Right now, your body knows how to rest. It's already doing it in 1,000 ways. Your breathing deepening slightly, your muscles releasing tension you didn't know you were holding, your nervous system shifting toward calm. None of this requires your thinking mind's help. In fact, the more your thinking mind tries to help, the more it interferes with what's already happening naturally. Sometimes the deepest truths require no words at all. No explanation, no analysis, no verbal understanding, just direct recognition that bypasses thought entirely. The next story takes us to a moment when the Buddha himself taught this way, pointing to truth through silence rather than speech, showing that what cannot be said is sometimes more powerful than anything words could convey. On Vulture Peak, a mountain sacred to seekers of truth, a vast assembly gathered to hear the Buddha teach. Thousands of monks sat in neat rows, their robes the color of earth and saffron, their faces turned upward with anticipation. Lay followers crowded the outer edges, hoping to catch even a few words of wisdom from the awakened one. The air itself seemed to wait, holding its breath for what would surely be a profound discourse on the nature of reality, the path to liberation, the deepest truths of existence. These gatherings were known across the land. The Buddha's teachings could last hours, sometimes days, as he carefully unpacked the Dharma through stories, analogies, logical reasoning, and patient explanation. His words had the power to transform lives, to shift perspectives so completely that people walked away, seeing the world with entirely new eyes. Today's crowd had traveled from distant villages, some for many days, to hear whatever teaching he would offer. The Buddha took his seat on the teaching platform. The assembly fell silent. 10,000 pairs of eyes watching, 10,000 minds ready to receive his words, to analyze them, to memorize them, to carry them back to their communities and share what they had learned. Scribes prepared to record every syllable. Senior disciples leaned forward, ready to ask clarifying questions if needed. The newest students sat with notebooks, determined not to miss a single insight. The Buddha reached down beside his seat and picked up a single white lotus flower. He held it up, turning it slowly so the assembly could see it from all angles. The pure white petals, the golden center, the green stem still dripping with water from the pond where it had been growing just hours before. Then he simply sat there, holding the flower, saying nothing. The silence stretched. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. The assembly began to shift uncomfortably. Surely the teaching would begin soon. Surely this was just a dramatic pause before he launched into an explanation of what the flower represented. Purity, perhaps, or the unfolding of enlightenment, or the beauty that grows from muddy water. But the Buddha remained silent, simply holding the flower, his eyes soft and present, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. 5 minutes passed. 10. The crowd grew restless. What did this mean? Was this a test? A riddle they were supposed to solve? Minds raced, trying to figure it out, trying to extract meaning from the silence, trying to understand what the flower was meant to teach them. Some students thought it must be about impermanence. The flower would wilt and die, showing the transient nature of all things. Others thought it represented Buddha nature, the inherent purity that exists in all beings, despite growing in the mud of suffering. Still, others constructed elaborate interpretations, involving the petals as the eightfold path, or the stem as the connection between earth and enlightenment. Their minds worked furiously, building concepts, creating frameworks, trying to translate the simple gesture into words they could understand, analyze, and remember. And then, in the midst of all this mental activity, one person in the vast assembly smiled. Mahakashyapa, sitting quietly in the third row, suddenly smiled, not the smile of someone who has figured out the answer to a puzzle, but the smile of someone who has seen something directly, without the interference of thought, without the need for explanation. The Buddha saw this smile and nodded. I have the treasure of the true Dharma I, the marvelous mind of nirvana, the true form without form, the subtle gateway of the Dharma. It does not depend on words and letters, but is a special transmission outside the scriptures. This I entrust to Mahakashyapa. The assembly was stunned. What had just happened? What had Mahakashyapa understood that they had missed? They had all seen the same flower, heard the same silence. What was there to get? But that was exactly the point. There was nothing to get, nothing to figure out, nothing to translate into concepts and carry away in the mind's filing cabinet of spiritual knowledge. Mahakashyapa hadn't understood the flower. He had simply seen it, directly, completely, without his thinking mind inserting itself between his awareness and the actual living presence of white petals, golden center, green stem. While everyone else was busy trying to understand what the flower meant, Mahakashyapa had simply met the flower as it was, and in that direct meeting, without words, without concepts, without the exhausting work of interpretation, he touched what the Buddha was pointing toward. This is what happens when we stop trying to translate everything into language. Right now, you're hearing these words, and your mind is probably doing what the assembly did, trying to understand, trying to figure out the lesson, trying to extract meaning that you can grasp and hold on to. This isn't wrong. Words have their place, but they can also become a barrier between you and direct experience. Think about the last time you saw something truly beautiful, a sunset maybe, or a child's face lit up with joy, or a moment of unexpected grace. What did your mind do? Probably started narrating immediately. That's beautiful, it said, already one step removed from actually seeing. Then perhaps it compared this sunset to other sunsets you've seen, or it started planning how to describe it to someone else, or it pulled out your phone to take a picture, which meant you were now looking at the sunset through a screen rather than directly. Each of these moves, labeling, comparing, narrating, capturing, pulls you out of direct experience and into thinking about experience. The thinking isn't bad, but it's also not the same as actually being present with what's right in front of you. The Buddha could have given a brilliant discourse about the lotus flower. He could have explained its symbolism, connected it to various aspects of the Dharma, created a framework for understanding that would have given the assembly something to study and debate for years. And they would have loved it, because thinking minds love having something to think about, something to analyze, something to understand. But he didn't do that. He just held up the flower, because some truths cannot be spoken, not because they're mysterious or hidden, but because the moment you put them into words, you've already moved away from the direct experience they're pointing toward. There's an intelligence that recognizes truth before thought labels it. You know this intelligence You use it all the time, without realizing it. A baker's hands know when dough is ready. Not because the baker is thinking about gluten development and hydration ratios, but because 10,000 batches have taught her hands to feel the exact texture, the subtle resistance, the way properly developed dough responds to pressure. She knows through her hands, directly, before any words form in her mind. A musician's fingers find the right notes without conscious direction. Her hands have practiced so many times that they know the geography of the instrument better than her thinking mind could ever map it. The music flows through her fingers, not because she's thinking about which key to press next, but because her body has learned the language of melody and her hands speak it fluently. A woodworker feels how the grain wants to be cut. His hands recognize the wood's resistance, know when to apply more pressure and when to ease back, sense the difference between working with the material and fighting against it, all without verbal thought, all through direct physical knowing. This is the same kind of knowing Mahakashyapa had when he saw the flower. Not conceptual understanding that can be explained in words, but direct recognition that bypasses language entirely. Your hands have been practicing this all along. Every time you've caught something without thinking about it, every time you've adjusted your balance automatically, every time you've known something through physical sensation rather than mental analysis, that's your body's intelligence working without words. The Buddha taught, when words cease and there is no speech, this is called the entrance to the gate of Dharma illumination. Not because words are bad or wrong, but because reality itself doesn't exist in language. Language is a tool for pointing, describing, communicating, immensely useful, but fundamentally separate from what it describes. You can read 100 descriptions of what an apple tastes like, memorize elaborate vocabulary about its sweetness, tartness, and texture, but none of those words are the actual experience of biting into an apple. The experience itself exists outside language. It's direct, immediate, and complete, without any words at all. This matters for your tired mind because language is exhausting. Every word requires mental processing. Every sentence needs to be parsed, understood, related to previous sentences, fit into existing frameworks of meaning. Every explanation demands that you follow along, check your understanding, make sure you're getting it right. Even these words right now are asking your mind to work, to process, to comprehend. But the flower doesn't ask anything. It just is. White petals, golden center, green stem, meeting it directly, without words, without interpretation, without the work of understanding. Your mind can finally rest. This is what your body knows, that your thinking mind keeps forgetting. Your body lives in direct experience constantly. It feels temperature without naming it hot or cold. It senses tension and release without labeling them. It knows tiredness and energy as direct physical reality, not as concepts to be understood. A potter's hands know when clay has the right moisture, not because they've memorized a formula, but because they've touched countless pieces of clay and can feel the difference directly. A gardener's fingers know how deep to plant a seed, not from measuring, but from an embodied sense of rightness that comes from years of handling soil and watching what grows. A cook's hands know when bread dough has been kneaded enough, not from counting folds, but from the way the dough responds under their palms. A knowing that exists in the hands themselves, before language, before thought. Every skilled movement is meditation without trying. When your hands are doing something they know how to do, really know, in the body rather than in the mind, thought becomes unnecessary. The dancer who has practiced the same sequence 1,000 times doesn't think, now right foot, now turn, now extend. The body simply dances, and the thinking mind can rest. The typist who has typed for decades doesn't hunt for each letter. The fingers find the keys faster than conscious thought could direct them. This is your body practicing no mind every time it performs a familiar skill. Not something you need to learn or achieve, something you already do whenever you trust your physical intelligence over your analytical mind. But here's what happens. You watch yourself. The baker second guesses her hands, thinking maybe she should check the recipe again. The musician becomes conscious of her fingering and suddenly stumbles over notes she's played perfectly 1,000 times. The woodworker starts analyzing his technique and loses the intuitive feel that guided him. When you watch yourself doing something, you split your attention. Part of you is doing the thing, and part of you is monitoring the doing, evaluating it, judging it, checking if it's being done correctly. This is what happened to the centipede when the toad asked about her legs. This is what happens to your rest when your thinking mind starts managing it. The assembly on Vulture Peak was watching, analyzing, trying to understand, and they missed what was right in front of them. Mahakashyapa wasn't trying to understand. He was simply present, directly meeting the flower without the interference of interpretation, without the exhausting work of turning experience into explanation. Your hands already know this. Every time they perform a familiar task without your conscious direction, they're showing you how to be present without the interference of thought. The question isn't how to learn this. You already know it. The question is how to stop watching yourself long enough to let this natural intelligence work. Sometimes we lose this natural knowing by becoming too conscious of ourselves, too aware of being watched by others or by our own inner observer. And when that happens, even the simplest actions become awkward, forced, exhausting. The next story shows exactly this. What happens when the observer's gaze turns something naturally graceful into something impossibly difficult? Sona was born without sight. He entered the world the way all infants do, crying, breathing, hungry for milk. But his eyes never registered the faces leaning over him, never tracked movement across a room, never learned to distinguish his mother's features from shadows on the wall. Darkness was not something he experienced as the absence of light. It was simply the way his world was, complete and whole, requiring no comparison to anything else. As a child, he learned to navigate through sound and touch, and the subtle vibrations that sighted people never notice, because their eyes give them information first. He knew his mother's approach by the particular rhythm of her footsteps, could distinguish his father's breathing from his brother's, felt the warmth of sunlight on his skin without needing to see its source. His world was rich with texture, temperature, sound, and sensation, a complete reality that never felt limited because he'd never known it any other way. When he heard about the Buddha's teaching, something in those words spoke to him. Not because he could see some vision of enlightenment, but because the Dharma described a way of knowing that matched how he already experienced life, directly, through immediate contact, without the interpretations that eyes so often impose. He went to the monastery and asked to become a monk. The other monks exchanged uncertain glances. How could someone who couldn't see learn the Dharma? How would he read the texts, observe the proper forms, navigate the practices that seemed to require sight at every turn? But the Buddha welcomed him without hesitation. The Dharma is not found in texts alone, he said. It's found in direct experience, which Sona already knows intimately. The teaching began not with scrolls or visual demonstrations, but with sound. A senior monk would speak the teachings aloud, slowly, clearly, and Sona would listen with an attention that sighted students rarely achieved. When others' eyes wandered to movements in the room, to the play of light through windows, to the faces of fellow students, Sona's full awareness rested in the words themselves, their meaning, their rhythm, their subtle implications. He learned the Four Noble Truths through feeling them in his own experience. Suffering, he knew it not as a concept, but as the actual sensation of discomfort, frustration, the wanting things to be different than they were. The cause of suffering, he felt how his mind created stories about his blindness, wishing he could see, comparing himself to sighted monks, building elaborate narratives of limitation. The end of suffering, he experienced directly what happened when those stories quieted, when wanting ceased, when the mind simply rested in what was actually present rather than what it imagined should be present. Touch became his primary teacher. His hands learned the textures of everything, the smoothness of polished meditation beads, the rough grain of wooden prayer wheels, the particular way robes folded, the shapes of offering bowls, the living warmth of another person's hand in greeting. Through touch, he understood impermanence directly. He could feel how everything changed, temperature shifting throughout the day, surfaces wearing smooth under repeated contact, his own body aging and transforming. Sound revealed patterns that sighted people missed entirely. He could hear the difference between someone walking with confidence and someone moving with uncertainty, between genuine laughter and polite performance, between words spoken from deep understanding and words merely repeated from memory. The quality of silence spoke to him. The silence after a profound teaching felt different than the silence of confusion, though sighted monks often couldn't tell them apart. Within 3 years, something shifted in Sona that the other monks could sense, even if they couldn't quite name it. He carried a quality of complete presence that even senior practitioners envied. When he sat in meditation, there was no sense of him trying to get somewhere or achieve something. He was simply there, fully, his attention not divided by visual distractions, not pulled toward what he could see in the distance or what might be happening across the room. The Buddha recognized what had happened. Sona had become an arahant, one who has fully awakened, whose mind no longer creates unnecessary suffering, who lives in direct contact with reality as it actually is. But here's what surprised the other monks most. When they asked Sona to teach, expecting he would speak about accepting limitations or making the best of difficult circumstances, he said something completely different. Sight can be the greatest obstacle to seeing clearly, he told them. Your eyes show you surfaces and shapes, colors and movements, and your minds immediately create stories about what you're seeing. You see a person's face and decide they're happy or sad, trustworthy or suspicious, attractive or plain. You see an object and label it valuable or worthless, desirable or disposable. Your eyes give you so much information that your thinking mind never stops interpreting, never rests from the work of making sense of everything you see. He was right. The sighted monks realized how their eyes constantly fed information to their thinking minds, which then worked tirelessly to organize, categorize, judge, and respond to everything they saw. Walking through a garden, their eyes took in hundreds of visual details every second: colors, shapes, movements, relationships between objects, and their minds processed all of it, creating an ongoing commentary about what they were experiencing. Sona walked through the same garden, and his experience was completely different. He felt the sun's warmth on his left cheek, heard birds calling from specific locations, smelled flowers whose fragrance shifted as breezes moved, sensed the ground's texture changing under his feet. His mind wasn't processing visual information or creating stories about what things looked like. It simply rested in direct sensory contact with what was actually present. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught about direct knowing versus conceptual knowing. Direct knowing happens through immediate contact, the way your hand knows hot when it touches a flame, the way your tongue knows sweet when it tastes honey, the way your body knows tired without needing to think about what tiredness means. This knowing doesn't require words or concepts or explanations. It's complete in itself, instant, and accurate. Conceptual knowing happens through the thinking mind's interpretation of experience. You see fire and your mind thinks dangerous or beautiful or useful for cooking, all concepts layered on top of the direct experience of light and heat. These concepts aren't wrong, but they're also one step removed from the actual reality you're encountering. And maintaining all these concepts, all this ongoing interpretation, exhausts the mind. Sona's blindness forced him to rely on direct knowing because he couldn't access the visual information that usually triggers conceptual interpretation. He couldn't see someone's face and make assumptions about their character. He had to encounter them directly through tone of voice, quality of presence, the way they moved and spoke and related. He couldn't see an object and immediately categorize it as beautiful or ugly, new or old, expensive or cheap. He had to meet it through touch, weight, texture, direct properties, rather than visual interpretations. This is why we use the word insight for deep understanding, even though seeing has nothing to do with it. Real insight isn't visual. It's direct knowing that bypasses the eyes entirely, bypasses all conceptual thinking, and contacts truth immediately. Sona had this insight, not despite his blindness, but in many ways because of it. When one sense is removed, the others intensify. This isn't just about hearing becoming sharper or touch becoming more sensitive, though both of those happen. It's about attention itself becoming more focused, less divided, more capable of resting in single-pointed awareness rather than scattering across multiple inputs simultaneously. You can experience this yourself right now. Close your eyes for a moment and notice how your awareness of sound immediately sharpens. You hear things that were present all along but that your visual attention was drowning out. The hum of electronics, distant voices, your own breathing, the settling of the building around you. Without visual input demanding constant processing, your mind has space to receive other information more fully. The Buddha taught, that which is directly experienced is grasped fully. That which is conceived is only partially known. This points to exactly what Sona discovered, that direct sensory knowing is complete and immediate, while conceptual understanding is always incomplete, always one step removed from actual reality. Your thinking mind prefers concepts because they feel manageable, controllable, something it can grasp and hold on to. But direct experience can't be grasped. It can only be met in the moment it's happening. The warmth of sun on your skin right now isn't a concept you can file away and think about later. It's a reality you're experiencing now, or not at all. This is why Sona's teaching freed so many monks from the exhaustion of constant mental interpretation. He showed them that you don't need to understand everything you experience. You don't need to label it, categorize it, Figure out what it means or how it fits into your conceptual framework. You can simply be present with the direct knowing that happens through your senses before thought begins its commentary. Your body does this naturally all the time. Your skin knows temperature without thinking, "This is 72 degrees." Your ears know sound without thinking, "This frequency is 440 hertz." Your nose knows fragrance without thinking, "This is the molecular structure of rose oil." All of this direct knowing happens instantly, completely, accurately, and it requires zero mental effort. The exhausting part is what comes after, the thinking mind's insistence on interpreting, explaining, relating this direct experience to everything else it knows, building elaborate conceptual structures on top of simple sensory reality. Sona lived in direct knowing because his blindness gave him no choice. But you have this same capacity. Right now, your body is providing direct knowing about everything it's touching, hearing, feeling. The question is whether your thinking mind will let you rest in that direct knowing, or whether it will immediately start its interpretive work, building concepts and stories that pull you away from immediate reality. Insight, real insight, the kind that frees the mind from its exhausting patterns, comes not from seeing more, but from resting in the direct knowing that's always available beneath conceptual interpretation. This is what Sona taught, and this is what his blindness paradoxically allowed him to see more clearly than those with perfect vision. Yet so often we freeze when observed, losing the natural flow of direct knowing the moment we become conscious of being watched. The next story reveals exactly this, how the observer's gaze, whether from others or from ourselves, can paralyze what moves perfectly when left alone. In a mountain monastery, there lived a young monk named Chen, who had a particular gift. He could recite sutras with perfect clarity, every word flowing into the next, with a rhythm that made the ancient teachings come alive. Alone in his small room at dawn, he would chant the texts he'd memorized, his voice steady and sure, never stumbling, never hesitating, the words emerging as naturally as breathing. His roommate often woke to the sound of these morning recitations and marveled at Chen's flawless delivery. The words came so smoothly, so effortlessly, that it seemed Chen had been born knowing these texts, rather than having spent years memorizing them. But there was something strange. During formal ceremonies, when the entire monastery gathered and monks took turns reciting before the assembly, Chen would volunteer eagerly, confident in his ability. Yet the moment he stood before the group, something happened. His voice would shake. He'd lose his place. Words that flowed perfectly in private would tangle in his mouth, and he'd stumble through passages he knew by heart, his face flushing with embarrassment as he struggled to the end. This happened repeatedly. Perfect in solitude, paralyzed before others. Chen couldn't understand it. The words hadn't changed. His knowledge hadn't disappeared. So why could he recite flawlessly when alone, but barely manage when others were listening? The monastery's head teacher, Master Hui, noticed this pattern. He'd heard Chen practicing through the thin walls and knew the young monk's capability. One evening, he invited Chen to his quarters. "Tomorrow morning," Master Hui said, "I want you to recite the Heart Sutra in my presence. Just the two of us. I'll be sitting in meditation while you recite." Chen agreed, though anxiety immediately tightened in his chest. Even in front of just one person, he knew what would happen. The next morning, Chen entered the master's room. Master Hui sat facing the wall in meditation posture, perfectly still, apparently paying no attention to Chen at all. Chen took a breath and began. The Bodhisattva of compassion, when practicing deeply the perfection of wisdom, saw clearly that he stopped. The words had scattered like startled birds. He knew the next line perfectly. He'd recited it flawlessly yesterday morning alone. But now, knowing Master Huyi was listening, even with his back turned, Chen's mind went blank. He started again, made it 3 lines further, then stumbled. Started again, stumbled again. His perfect recitation had become a halting, awkward mess. Master Hui remained silent, unmoving, his back still turned. Chen felt the familiar shame rising. He was failing again, proving himself incapable, demonstrating his inadequacy right in front of the one person whose respect he most wanted. He tried harder, concentrating intensely on each word, which only made things worse. Then Master Hui spoke without turning around. "Chen, who is reciting right now?" The question was so unexpected that Chen forgot to be nervous for a moment. "I am, Master," he answered. "And who is listening to you recite?" "You are, Master." "And who else is listening?" Chen paused. "No one else is here, Master." "Look more closely," Master Hui said gently. "Who else is listening?" And suddenly, Chen saw it. He was listening, not just reciting, but simultaneously listening to himself recite, judging how he sounded, evaluating his performance, monitoring for mistakes, comparing this recitation to how it should sound. Part of him was speaking while another part was watching the speaking, criticizing it, anticipating failure, creating the very stumbling it feared. "I'm watching myself," Chen said quietly. "Yes," Master Hui replied. "And this watching, this is what tangles your words. When you recite alone, there's just reciting. When you recite before others, there's reciting, and also someone watching the reciting, judging it, trying to control it. This split divides your attention and fractures the natural flow." He continued, still facing the wall. "Now recite again, But this time, forget that I'm here. Forget that you're here. Let there be only the words themselves, arising and passing like clouds moving across the sky. Chen closed his eyes. He let his attention sink beneath the watching, beneath the judging, beneath the performance anxiety. Just words. Just sound emerging from silence and returning to silence. The Bodhisattva of compassion, when practicing deeply the perfection of wisdom, saw clearly that the 5 aggregates are empty. The words flowed. Each line emerged complete, natural, without effort or strain. Chen recited the entire sutra perfectly, and when he finished, he realized he'd completely forgotten Master Hui was there, forgotten to monitor his performance, forgotten to watch himself doing it. There had been only the recitation itself, whole and undivided. This is what happens when the watcher steps back. You have this watcher too, that part of your mind that simultaneously experiences and observes the experiencing, that lives your life while also monitoring how well you're living it. Right now, part of you is listening to these words, while another part is watching you listen, judging whether you're paying attention correctly, evaluating whether you're relaxed enough, checking if you're understanding properly. This split happens constantly. You're having a conversation while simultaneously watching yourself have it, monitoring your words, judging your responses, wondering what the other person thinks of you. You're walking down the street while watching yourself walk, aware of how you look, adjusting your posture, managing your appearance. You're trying to relax while watching yourself try to relax, evaluating how well you're doing at relaxing, which makes actual relaxation impossible. The Buddha taught about this when he spoke of self and not self. He said, "That which is inconstant is suffering. That which is suffering is not self. That which is not self should not be clung to as, this is mine, this is me, this is myself." This points to the exhausting habit of creating a separate self, a watcher that stands apart from experience and tries to manage it. But here's the peculiar thing about this watcher. It thinks it's helping you. The watcher believes its job is protection. By constantly monitoring your performance, it thinks it's keeping you from embarrassment, failure, or rejection. By judging your actions, it believes it's ensuring you do things correctly. By maintaining vigilant awareness of how others perceive you, it imagines it's safeguarding your social standing. But watch what actually happens. Chen's watcher, trying to help him recite perfectly, created the very stumbling it was trying to prevent. The athlete's watcher, trying to ensure good performance, creates the tension that blocks natural movement. Your watcher, trying to help you relax, creates the self-consciousness that makes relaxation impossible. The watcher consumes enormous energy because it never rests. Even during sleep, it maintains some level of vigilance, which is why you wake up tired even after 8 hours of rest. It's constantly dividing your attention, part experiencing, part watching the experiencing, part judging the watching of the experiencing in an endless, recursive loop. This is why simple tasks become difficult when you're self-conscious. Walking is effortless until you're aware of being watched. Then suddenly, you're not sure what to do with your arms or whether your stride looks normal. Conversation flows naturally until you become conscious of being evaluated. Then every word feels forced and awkward. Even breathing becomes labored when you're monitoring it, trying to breathe correctly instead of letting breath happen on its own. The split between experiencer and observer creates exhaustion because you're essentially trying to be in two places at once, living your experience while simultaneously standing outside it, judging how well you're living it. No wonder you're tired. But here's what Master Hui understood and what Chen discovered in that moment of perfect recitation. The watcher isn't actually a separate entity. It's a habit of attention, a pattern the mind has learned, a way of relating to experience that can be set down. When Chen forgot Master Hui was there, forgot he was performing, forgot to monitor and judge and control, the watcher dissolved, not because he fought against it, but because his attention dropped beneath it entirely. There was just reciting happening, complete in itself, without anyone standing apart from it trying to manage how it was happening. This is what rest actually is, not a state you achieve, but what naturally emerges when the watching stops. When there's no one monitoring whether you're resting correctly, no one judging your relaxation, no one maintaining vigilant awareness of how it's going, then rest simply happens. The way Chen's recitation simply happened when the watcher stepped back. You've experienced this yourself. Those rare moments when you're so absorbed in something that self-consciousness disappears entirely, maybe during a conversation that becomes so engaging you forget to monitor your words, or while doing something you love so much, you lose track of time and evaluation falls away completely. In those moments, the split between experiencer and observer collapses and you're simply present, whole, undivided. This wholeness isn't something you need to create or achieve. It's what's already there beneath the watching, beneath the judging, beneath the exhausting work of maintaining a separate observer who monitors everything. But sometimes, the watcher is so deeply entrenched, so habitual, that only something drastic can break its hold. Sometimes it takes total devastation, losing everything you thought protected you, for the watching to finally collapse. When everything falls apart, sometimes the watcher falls apart too, and what emerges from that breaking can be completely unexpected. Ubiri had been a courtesan in her earlier life, admired throughout the city for her beauty and grace. But those years felt distant now, almost as if they'd happened to someone else entirely. What mattered, what consumed her entire world, was her daughter Jiva, a girl whose laughter could brighten any room, whose small hand fit perfectly in hers, whose very existence had transformed Ubiri from a woman focused on appearance and status into someone capable of pure, unconditional love. Then fever came, the kind that burns through a child's body faster than anyone can stop it. Ubiri tried everything: healers, herbs, prayers, desperate bargains with any force that might be listening. Nothing worked. Within 3 days, Jiva was gone, her small body growing cold in Ubiri's arms as the morning light came through the window. They took Jiva to the burning ground on the city's edge, that place where bodies turned to smoke and ash, where the dead were released back into the elements they'd come from. Ubiri watched the flames consume her daughter's form, watched the smoke rise and dissipate into empty air, and something inside her broke that would not mend. She began going to the burning ground every day. Not to the place where Jiva's ashes had been scattered. That spot was unmarked, impossible to locate among all the other ashes, all the other grief that had soaked into that ground over countless years. But Ubiri went there anyway, wandering among the funeral pyres and cremation sites, calling her daughter's name. Jiva, my darling Jiva. She called it again and again, her voice raw, her eyes searching for something that couldn't be found, her hands reaching for a child who would never again hold them. People whispered about her, the mad mother, the one who couldn't let go, who'd lost her mind along with her daughter. Some felt pity, others discomfort, but everyone avoided her, this woman whose grief had become so naked, so total, that it made them afraid of their own potential for such devastation. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Ubiri stopped caring for herself entirely. Her former beauty meant nothing. She barely ate, rarely slept, wore whatever clothes came to hand without thought for their condition. The only thing that existed was her daughter's absence, this hole in the world that she couldn't stop falling into, couldn't climb out of, couldn't even properly name, because naming it would make it real in a way she couldn't bear. Every morning she returned to the burning ground calling, "Jiva, Jiva," as if her voice might somehow reach across the boundary between life and death, as if her grief might be strong enough to pull her daughter back from wherever the dead go. One morning, the Buddha was walking near the burning ground and heard this crying. He'd heard such cries before. Grief is as common as breathing among those who don't yet understand impermanence, but something in this woman's voice carried a quality he recognized. This wasn't just sadness. This was someone standing at the edge, where the mind breaks, where self-preservation dissolves, where everything that usually holds a person together has come completely apart. He approached her slowly. Ubiri didn't notice him at first, lost in her calling, her searching, her impossible hope that this time her daughter might somehow answer. "Ubiri," the Buddha said gently. She turned, startled to hear her own name, to have someone address her as if she was still a person, rather than just this walking wound of grief. "Which jiva are you crying for?" he asked. The question made no sense to her. "My daughter," she said, confused. "My daughter Jiva." "But which jiva?" the Buddha persisted, his voice still gentle but insistent. "In this burning ground alone, 84,000 girls named Jiva have been cremated. Which one are you crying for?" The words struck Ubiri like a physical blow. 84,000. 84,000 daughters, 84,000 mothers, 84,000 griefs exactly like hers, not similar to hers, not comparable to hers, but identical in their unbearable weight, in their sense of unique, world-ending loss. "And not just here," the Buddha continued, his words falling like stones into still water, sending ripples outward that would never stop. "In all your past lives, which daughter are you crying for? The tears you've shed for lost children and lost parents and lost loved ones, if gathered together, they would form an ocean deeper than any sea on earth." Something shifted in Ubiri. Not immediately, not all at once, but like ice, beginning to crack under spring sun. She'd been drowning in the specific, in this daughter, this loss, this unbearable particular grief. She'd made an identity out of being Jiva's mother, and when Jiva died, that identity shattered, leaving her wandering this burning ground, trying to find the pieces, trying to put back together who she'd been. But the Buddha was showing her something else entirely. Not that her grief didn't matter. It mattered absolutely, completely, with the full weight of a mother's love. But that this grief wasn't special, wasn't unique, wasn't setting her apart from all of humanity. It was connecting her to everyone who'd ever lived and lost, everyone who'd ever loved and watched what they loved disappear. "All that we love, we will lose," the Buddha said. "This is the nature of existence. Every meeting ends in parting. Every gathering ends in separation. Every birth ends in death. Not because the world is cruel, but because this is what it means for things to exist at all. They arise, they change, they pass away." For the first time in months, Ubiri stopped calling her daughter's name. She stood there in the burning ground, surrounded by ash and memory and the smoke of other people's losses, and something inside her that had been clenched so tight, it had become her entire identity finally released. This is what extreme suffering can do when it breaks you completely. Most of the time, when pain comes, you try to protect yourself. You build walls, create stories, maintain some core of identity that stays separate from the suffering. This is happening to me, but I am still me underneath it. The watcher remains, monitoring your pain, evaluating your grief, maintaining the separation between the one who suffers and the suffering itself. But Obiri's grief was too total for that. It had dissolved all boundaries, all protection, all sense of a separate self who could stand apart and observe. She'd become her grief entirely. There was no Obiri separate from the pain, no observer watching the grieving, just this pure, undiluted experience of loss that had consumed everything else. This sounds like the worst thing that could happen. And in one sense it is, this complete breaking, this dissolution of all the structures that usually hold you together. But here's what the Buddha understood, and what Obiri discovered. When the watcher completely breaks down, when there's nothing left to protect or perform or maintain, something unexpected can emerge. Freedom. Not freedom from pain. The pain was still there. The loss was still real. Jiva was still gone and would never return. But freedom from the exhausting work of maintaining a separate self who had to manage the pain, control it, overcome it, somehow survive it, intact. When that structure collapsed entirely, what remained was something simpler, more immediate, less burdened by the constant work of self-maintenance. The Buddha taught, all formations are impermanent. When one sees this with insight, one becomes weary of suffering. This is the path to purity. These words point to exactly what Obiri experienced. Not that impermanence is a nice philosophical idea to contemplate, but that it's the fundamental nature of everything, including the self that seems so solid, so permanent, so necessarily in need of protection. Your own identity, the story of who you are, what you've accomplished, what you've lost, what defines you, this is also impermanent. It feels permanent because you're maintaining it constantly, reinforcing it through repetition, defending it against threats, performing it for others and yourself. This maintenance takes enormous energy. But when something breaks you so completely that you can't maintain it anymore, when grief or shock or devastation is so total that the usual structures of self-identity simply collapse, sometimes what emerges is a recognition that the self you were so carefully maintaining was always just a construction, always optional, always more exhausting than necessary. This doesn't mean extreme suffering is good, or necessary, or something to seek out. Obiri's grief was real and terrible, and not to be minimized. But the Buddha met her in that grief, and showed her something that transformed it, not by making the pain go away, but by revealing that the identity she'd built around being Jiva's mother, and then around being the mother whose child died, wasn't the deepest truth of what she was. When Obiri stopped calling for Jiva, she didn't stop loving her daughter. She didn't stop feeling the loss or pretend it hadn't happened. But she stopped making an identity out of that loss, stopped defining herself by the story of her suffering, stopped maintaining the exhausting separation between the one who grieves and the grief itself. What remained was simpler. Someone who had loved deeply and lost what she loved, which is just part of what it means to be human, to be alive, to care about anything at all. Not special, not unique, not setting her apart, just connected to the great current of human experience, where everyone who loves eventually loses, where every meeting ends in parting. This connection, this recognition that your suffering isn't uniquely yours, but shared by everyone who's ever lived, can be strangely freeing. Not because it minimizes your pain, but because it means you're not alone in it, not separated from humanity by it. You're part of something larger than your individual story, something that includes all the joys and all the losses, all the meetings and all the partings, all the love and all the grief. The watcher thinks its job is to protect you from this, to maintain your sense of separate identity, to keep your story intact, to defend against anything that might break down the boundaries between you and the rest of existence. But sometimes those boundaries need to break. Sometimes the only way through is complete dissolution, complete breaking, complete letting go of everything you thought you were and everything you thought you needed to maintain. And sometimes, not always, not reliably, but sometimes, what emerges from that breaking is something freer, something less burdened, something that doesn't require constant maintenance and protection, because it's no longer defined by the story of being a separate self, navigating through a threatening world. Ubiri left the burning ground that day and never returned to call for Jiva among the ashes. The grief didn't disappear. How could it? But it no longer consumed her, because she was no longer maintaining the identity of the inconsolable mother, the one whose loss set her apart, the one whose watching of her own grief had become another form of suffering. Even without tragedy, nature shows us how to release what we're gripping so tightly. The trees don't decide when to let their leaves fall. They simply stop holding on when the season changes, and the leaves drop naturally, without effort, without grief. The next story reveals this letting go that requires no devastation, no breaking, just the simple recognition that holding on is optional. A young student came to Master Shitu's hermitage carrying a question that had tormented him for months. He'd tried every meditation technique his teachers had offered, studied texts on calming the mind, practiced concentration exercises until his head ached, but still, his thoughts never stopped. They came unbidden, one after another, an endless stream that gave him no peace. "Master," he said, bowing deeply, "I've come to ask for your guidance. No matter what I do, I cannot stop my thoughts. They arise constantly, pulling my attention in every direction. How do I make them stop? What technique will finally quiet my mind? It was autumn, and Master Shitu sat outside his hermitage under an old maple tree. The tree's branches spread wide overhead, still holding most of their leaves, though the season was turning. As the student finished his question, a gust of wind moved through the branches and several leaves detached, spiraling down through the air to land softly on the ground. Master Shitu didn't respond immediately. He simply watched the leaves fall, some drifting slowly, others spinning as they descended, each following its own path down. More wind came, and more leaves released their grip on the branches, falling in a gentle cascade. Finally, he looked at the student. "Did you see those leaves fall?" "Yes, Master." "Did you make them fall?" "No, Master." "Did the tree decide to release them?" The student paused, considering. "I don't think so, Master. They just fell when the season changed and the wind blew. And when they were on the branches," Shitu continued, "did the tree work hard to keep them there?" "No," the student said slowly. "They held on naturally until it was time to let go." Master Shitu nodded. "Your thoughts are like these leaves. They come when conditions are right for them to come. They stay for a while. They go when conditions are right for them to go. You don't make them arise, and you don't need to make them stop. Trying to control thoughts is like standing under this tree, demanding that leaves stay on branches or fall on command. They'll do what they do according to their own nature, regardless of your demands." The student stood there, watching more leaves drift down. His whole practice had been built on the assumption that he needed to do something about his thoughts. Stop them, control them, organize them, make them behave differently than they naturally did. But these leaves weren't being controlled by anything. They simply responded to conditions, wind, temperature, the changing season, the tree's biology, and when those conditions aligned, falling happened naturally. "But Master," the student said, "thoughts are different from leaves. They're mine. They happen in my mind. Surely I have some control over them." Shitu smiled slightly. "Do you choose what thought comes next? Right now, can you decide what your mind will think 5 minutes from now?" The student tried. He decided he would think about his mother's garden in exactly 5 minutes. But immediately, other thoughts arose, wondering if he was doing this correctly, noticing the cold wind, thinking about what the master might say next, remembering he'd forgotten to close the door at his lodging. 5 minutes passed, and his mind had thought about 20 different things, none of them his mother's garden, until he tried to remember what he'd been planning to think about. Thoughts arise according to conditions, Master Shitu said. Something you see triggers a memory. A sound reminds you of something else. A feeling in your body prompts a worry. Thoughts come like weather. You don't create the rain or the wind. You simply experience them passing through. This understanding changes everything about how you relate to your thinking. Right now, thoughts are probably arising as you listen, wondering about something, planning what comes next, judging whether you understand, drifting to unrelated topics. You didn't decide to think these thoughts. They arose on their own, triggered by conditions you're mostly not even aware of, a word that sparked an association, a physical sensation that prompted a worry, a memory that surfaced without invitation. The Buddha taught, phenomena arise and pass away. To see their arising and passing is true freedom. This points to exactly what Master Shitu was showing, that thoughts are phenomena, events that happen, natural occurrences like leaves falling or clouds moving. They're not you, not yours, not requiring your management or control. But your exhausted mind has been trying to control them anyway. Trying to stop thoughts that don't want to stop. Trying to hold on to thoughts that naturally pass. Trying to organize thoughts that arise chaotically. Trying to make your thinking different from how it naturally is. This is why you're tired, not from having thoughts, but from the constant effort to manage them, control them, make them behave in ways they're not designed to behave. Imagine standing under that maple tree trying to control when leaves fall. You'd exhaust yourself reaching up to hold leaves on branches, running around trying to catch them before they hit the ground, attempting to organize them into neat piles, even as wind scatters them again. This is what you're doing with thoughts, expending enormous energy, trying to control a natural process that works perfectly well without your interference. The permission Master Shitu offered isn't permission to think whatever you want or to act on every thought that arises. It's permission to stop fighting the fact that thoughts arise and pass on their own. Let them come like leaves falling. Let them go like leaves scattered by wind. You don't need to make either happen. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop engaging with your thinking when engagement is useful. Sometimes you need to focus attention, solve problems, plan actions, and thoughts serve these purposes well. But even then, the thoughts themselves still arise and pass according to conditions. You're working with thoughts, using them as tools, not controlling their fundamental nature any more than you control whether leaves grow on trees in spring. What happens when you stop trying to manage your mental weather? The same thing that happens to leaves when you stop trying to control their falling. They do exactly what they were always going to do, but now you're not exhausting yourself fighting it. Like water, the easiest path is often the one we resist most. Water teaches something profound about effort and ease. Watch how water moves. It always finds the lowest path, not through thinking or planning or deciding, but through following the natural pull of gravity and the shape of the landscape. It doesn't push uphill. It doesn't fight against obstacles. It simply flows where flow is easiest, and in doing so, it can wear away stone, carve canyons, shape entire landscapes. Place water in a cup, and it becomes the cup. Pour it into a bowl, and it becomes the bowl. Water adapts completely to whatever contains it, while never losing its essential nature as water. It doesn't resist the container's shape, doesn't fight to maintain some previous form, doesn't exhaust itself trying to be something other than what the situation requires. This is intelligence without thought. Water doesn't think about where to go. It goes there naturally, responding to physical reality rather than ideas about what should happen. Your exhausted mind could learn from this. The exhausted mind fights reality constantly. It argues with what is, insists things should be different, maintains elaborate resistance to circumstances that aren't changing, no matter how much mental energy you spend pushing against them. This shouldn't be happening. I shouldn't feel this way. My thoughts should be different. This isn't how things are supposed to be. Each of these sentences is the mind pushing uphill, fighting against gravity, exhausting itself in resistance to what's actually present. The resting mind flows with reality instead of against it. Not because it's given up or become passive, but because it recognizes that reality is what it is, regardless of whether you approve. Thoughts arise, that's reality. Emotions come and go, that's reality. Circumstances change in ways you didn't plan, that's reality. Fighting these facts doesn't change them. It just adds the suffering of resistance to whatever's already present. Water shows tremendous power through yielding rather than force. A rigid object breaks under pressure, but water flows around obstacles, adapts to resistance, and eventually wears away what seemed immovable. Your mind has this same capacity when it stops trying to force things to be different than they are. What happens when you stop pushing against what is? The same thing that happens when water stops trying to flow uphill. You discover the natural path, the one that requires minimum effort because it works with reality's grain instead of against it. Your thoughts arising and passing. This is reality. You can exhaust yourself trying to stop them, or you can let them fall like leaves, come and go like weather, flow like water, finding its natural level. Neither option changes whether thoughts arise, but one exhausts you through constant resistance, while the other lets you rest by acknowledging what's actually happening. Master Shitu sat under that maple tree as leaves fell around him, not controlling them, not fighting them, not making them do anything other than what they were already doing naturally. And in that simple acceptance of falling leaves, he pointed toward how your mind can rest, not by stopping thoughts, but by stopping the exhausting fight to make them different than they are. What happens when we stop pushing against what is? Sometimes we discover that what felt like an immovable obstacle was actually something we could walk beside rather than fight. The next story shows exactly this, the difference between force and cooperation, between trying to make reality bend to your will and learning to move with it instead. In the ancient teachings preserved by the Buddha's disciples, there's a story that reveals something unexpected about strength. It comes from a time when the world of gods was not the peaceful paradise we might imagine, but a place where conflicts arose, just as they do everywhere consciousness exists. The Devas and the Asuras had been at war. These weren't humans fighting over land or resources, but celestial beings locked in a struggle that had gone on for longer than anyone could remember. After a particularly fierce battle, the Devas emerged victorious. Their leader, Sakka, captured the Asura king Veppachiti and brought him back as a prisoner, bound in chains and confined to a cell. One day, Sakka decided to visit the imprisoned king. When Sakka entered the prison cell, Veppachiti looked up at his captor, with eyes burning with rage and humiliation. What happened next was shocking. This king, even in defeat, even stripped of all power, unleashed a torrent of abuse at Sakka. He cursed him with the vilest words imaginable. He insulted Sakka's lineage, his character, his right to rule. He hurled accusations and threats, his voice rising with each breath, filling the cell with hatred and fury. The words were brutal, designed to wound, to provoke, to force some kind of reaction. Veppachiti spat out every insult he could think of, testing whether he could at least win this small battle of making his captor lose composure. And Sakka stood there, listening. He didn't argue back. He didn't justify himself or defend his actions. He didn't threaten Veppachiti with worse treatment or remind him of his powerless position. He simply stood there, calm and unmoved, as the storm of abuse washed over him like rain falling on a mountain. When Veppachiti finally exhausted himself, Sakka turned quietly and left the cell. Outside, Sakka's charioteer had witnessed everything. This loyal servant, who had seen Sakka lead armies to victory and command respect from all the heavenly beings, was deeply troubled. "My lord," he said, his voice filled with concern, "why did you just stand there and take that abuse? Everyone saw how that prisoner insulted you without any consequence. People will think you were afraid. They'll say you were weak. Your silence makes you look powerless." This is the moment where the teaching truly begins. Sakka turned to his charioteer with eyes that held no anger, no defensiveness, no need to prove anything. And he said something that would echo through the ages as one of the clearest expressions of what real strength looks like. "It is neither through fear nor weakness that I am patient with Veppachiti," Sakka replied calmly. Let those words settle for a moment. Not fear, not weakness, but patience. Saka continued, when you have power over someone, there is no strength in using that power to hurt them when they insult you. Anyone can strike back when they've been wounded. Anyone can use their position to crush someone weaker. Real power is having every ability to retaliate and choosing not to. Real strength is remaining calm when you have every reason to be angry. When the Buddha shared this story with his disciples, he praised Saka's response. He used a specific word, khanti, which means patience, forbearance, the ability to remain steady in the face of difficulty. And then the Buddha spoke words that would be remembered for thousands of years. The Buddha taught, he endures unangered insult, assault, and imprisonment. His army is strength, his strength forbearance. Think about that image, an army of patience. Not an army that attacks, but an army that holds steady. Strength that doesn't push back, but remains unmoved. This is the opposite of everything we've been taught about strength. We think strength means fighting back, standing up for ourselves, never letting anyone get away with disrespect. We believe that if someone attacks us and we don't respond with equal force, we're being weak, we're inviting more abuse. But Saka understood something deeper. He understood that reacting to Vepachiti's insults wouldn't change anything except his own inner peace. The prisoner was already defeated, already suffering the consequences of the war he'd lost. Adding punishment wouldn't make Saka stronger. It would just mean he'd allowed Vepachiti to control him, to pull him down into the same reactive pattern. Here's where this connects to everything we've been exploring about the exhausted mind. When you react to every provocation, when you fight back against every insult, when you defend yourself against every perceived slight, your mind never gets to rest. You're constantly mobilized for battle, constantly vigilant for threats, constantly working to protect your sense of self. Someone says something dismissive, and immediately your mind starts working, crafting the perfect comeback, replaying the insult, imagining all the ways you could make them feel small. Someone questions your competence, and your whole system goes on high alert, gathering evidence of your worth, preparing your defense. All of that is mental work, exhausting work, work that never ends because there will always be another insult, another challenge, another moment when someone fails to give you the respect you think you deserve. Saka's response shows another way. When you don't need to prove your strength, you don't need to react to every test of it. When you don't need to defend your dignity, you can't be robbed of it by someone's words. When you understand that other people's anger comes from their own suffering, you don't take it as personally as you once did. This doesn't mean you let people walk all over you. Saka didn't release Vepachiti from prison or pretend the insults didn't happen. He simply didn't add his own anger to the situation. He didn't escalate. There's a profound teaching here about working with reality instead of fighting against it. Vepachiti was going to be angry. That was the reality of the situation. A defeated king, stripped of power, locked in a cell, facing the person who'd conquered him. Of course he was going to lash out. Sakka could have fought against that reality. He could have tried to force Vepachiti into respectful silence through punishment or threats. But that would have been trying to change what couldn't be changed through force, another person's inner state. Instead, Sakka worked with the reality he found. Vepachiti was angry, so Sakka let him be angry without making that anger into a problem that needed solving. The insults were happening, so Sakka let them happen without needing to stop them or respond to them. This is what it means to let your mind rest even in difficult circumstances. You stop fighting reality. You stop insisting that things be different than they are before you can be at peace. You allow what's happening to happen without adding your resistance to it. In your own life, this might look like a colleague taking credit for your idea, and instead of spending 3 days plotting revenge, you simply note what happened and decide how to handle it practically going forward. It might look like a family member making their usual criticism, and instead of launching into your usual defense, you just let their words be what they are, their opinion, their pattern, without making it mean something about your worth. The exhaustion comes from the constant effort to control things that can't be controlled. You can't control what other people say about you. You can't control whether they respect you or dismiss you. But you can control whether you turn their words into a battle you must win, or whether you let them pass like clouds across the sky. Sakka's patience wasn't passive. It was one of the most active choices a person can make, the choice to remain centered when everything around you is pulling you off balance. The choice to stay calm when you have every justification for anger. This is the army the Buddha spoke of, not soldiers with weapons, but the unshakable strength of a mind that won't be moved by provocation. It's the kind of strength that actually makes your life easier instead of harder. When you stop reacting to every challenge, you stop creating new problems for yourself. When you stop defending yourself against every perceived attack, you stop exhausting yourself in battles that don't need to be fought. The mind that can rest is the mind that's learned this lesson from Sakka. Not the lesson that you should never stand up for yourself or never address problems, but the lesson that most of what we fight against isn't actually threatening us. It's just reality being what it is, and our resistance to that reality is what creates the suffering. Vepachiti's words couldn't actually harm Sakka unless Sakka gave them that power. The insults were just sounds, just vibrations in the air. They only became wounds if Sakka decided to receive them as wounds, to take them personally, to let them disturb his peace. In the same way, most of what disturbs your peace only has the power you give it. The colleague's dismissive comment, The friend's thoughtless remark, "These are just events happening in the world." They become problems only when you pick them up and carry them around, replaying them, fighting with them in your mind. This teaching isn't asking you to pretend insults don't sting or that betrayal doesn't hurt. It's showing you that you have a choice about what you do after that initial sting. You can spend your energy trying to force the other person to apologize, to see how wrong they were. Or you can acknowledge the hurt and then decide not to add to it by building a story around it, by making it mean something about your worth. Saka walked away from that prison cell with his dignity intact because his dignity never depended on Vepachiti's opinion of him. Your peace can be just as independent of other people's actions. Not because you're indifferent to how they treat you, but because you've stopped needing their approval or respect to know your own value. This is how the mind finally gets to rest. Not by winning every battle, but by recognizing that most battles don't need to be fought. Not by forcing everyone to treat you well, but by no longer depending on their treatment to determine your inner state. The Buddha saw this quality in Saka and praised it because it's one of the doorways to freedom. When you're no longer controlled by other people's words or actions, when you're no longer spending your life reacting and defending, you suddenly have all this energy available for what actually matters. And what you discover is that the strength you were looking for wasn't in winning the fight. It was in not needing to fight in the first place. Sometimes the loudest teaching makes no sound. There's a moment recorded in one of Buddhism's most celebrated teachings where the wisest answer to the deepest question was no answer at all. It happened in a gathering of some of the most accomplished spiritual teachers of the ancient world, and what unfolded there reveals something about truth that words can only point toward but never fully capture. The teacher was a man named Vimalakirti, a wealthy householder who lived not in a monastery, but in the ordinary world of family and business. Despite this conventional life, he was recognized as one of the most realized beings of his time, someone who had penetrated to the deepest levels of understanding. His wisdom was so profound that even the Buddha's most advanced disciples would visit him to learn. On this particular day, Vimalakirti's home was filled with an extraordinary assembly. Bodhisattvas had gathered from across the realm, beings of immense spiritual accomplishment, each one capable of explaining the most subtle teachings with perfect eloquence. These were not beginners struggling with basic concepts, but masters who had spent lifetimes refining their understanding. The conversation had turned to one of the most profound questions in all of Buddhist philosophy, the nature of non-duality. This wasn't an abstract intellectual puzzle, but a question that strikes at the heart of how we experience reality. We live in a world of splits, self and other, right and wrong, pleasure and pain, life and death. We organize our entire existence around these divisions, building walls between categories that seem absolutely real and separate. But what if these divisions are constructs of the thinking mind rather than features of reality itself? What if the deepest truth lies not in understanding the relationship between opposites, but in seeing through the illusion of separation altogether? This was the question posed to the assembly. How do you enter the teaching of non-duality? One by one, the bodhisattvas rose to offer their understanding. The first bodhisattva spoke with careful precision. Birth and death appear to be two things, he said. But when you understand that nothing is actually born, you also understand that nothing truly dies. When you see that there is no arising, you see that there is no ceasing. To enter this understanding is to enter the teaching of non-duality. His words were met with nods of appreciation. This was sophisticated wisdom, the kind that takes years of study and meditation to grasp. Another bodhisattva stood. I and mine seem to be fundamental realities, she offered. But when you investigate this I, you find it cannot be located anywhere. It has no substance, no fixed nature. When you see through the illusion of a separate self, you see that there is no mine either, no possession, no ownership, no territory to defend. To enter this understanding is to enter the teaching of non-duality. Again, the assembly appreciated the clarity and depth of the explanation. A third bodhisattva rose with even more refined analysis. Purity and impurity seem to be opposites, he said. But when you understand that all phenomena are empty of inherent nature, you see that nothing is ultimately pure or impure. These are labels the mind applies to experience, not qualities that exist in things themselves. When discrimination ceases, when the labeling mind rests, that is entry into non-duality. This continued for some time. Each bodhisattva offered increasingly subtle explanations, each one demonstrating profound understanding through carefully constructed arguments and precise philosophical distinctions. They spoke of form and emptiness, of knowing and not knowing, of attachment and detachment, of conventional truth and ultimate truth. Each explanation was brilliant in its own way, revealing years of study and contemplation. Each one took a pair of apparent opposites and showed how they dissolve upon deeper examination. The assembly was witnessing a display of the highest level of intellectual and spiritual accomplishment. Finally, all the bodhisattvas had spoken, except for two. The next to last was Manjushri, considered the embodiment of wisdom itself, the bodhisattva whose understanding of emptiness was said to be without equal. When he stood to speak, the assembly leaned forward, knowing they were about to hear something extraordinary. Manjushri smiled gently. All of these explanations have been excellent, he said. Each one has pointed toward the truth of non-duality with skill and clarity. But I would suggest that even to speak of this versus that, even to use words to explain the teaching, is already to be caught in duality. To truly enter non-duality is to be free from all words, all descriptions, all questions, and all answers. It is to be free from all indication and all explanation, from all names and all concepts. That is my understanding of entry into the teaching of non-duality. The silence that followed was profound. Manjushri had not only offered a teaching, but had pointed to the limitation of all the teachings that came before his, including his own. He had shown that any attempt to capture the uncapturable in words is already a step away from the truth being pointed toward. Then Manjushri turned to Vimalakirti, the only one who had not yet spoken. "We have all given our understanding," he said. "Now it is your turn. How does a bodhisattva enter the teaching of non-duality?" The entire assembly turned toward Vimalakirti. Everyone in that room knew they were about to witness something significant. Here was the master whose wisdom was recognized even by the Buddha himself, whose understanding was said to penetrate beyond all conceptual elaboration. Vimalakirti looked around at the gathered assembly. He saw the expectant faces, the minds ready to receive his words, the pens ready to record his teaching. And he said nothing. He simply sat there in complete silence. No words, no gestures, no teaching, not even a nod or a smile. Just silence. The moment stretched out. Still, Vimalakirti remained silent, his expression peaceful, his body relaxed, offering nothing that could be grasped as an answer. And suddenly, Manjushri understood. He broke into a radiant smile and exclaimed, "Excellent, excellent." Truly, this is entry into the teaching of non-duality, beyond words and syllables, beyond speech and explanation. This is the ultimate teaching. What had Vimalakirti shown in that thundering silence? He had demonstrated what all the eloquent words could only describe, the actual experience of non-duality, present in that moment, before thought divided it into subject and object, teacher and teaching, question and answer. Every explanation that came before his, no matter how sophisticated, had used the tools of thought and language. They had taken concepts and rearranged them, shown how apparent opposites dissolve under analysis, demonstrated the emptiness of constructs. These were valuable teachings, pointing toward truth. But Vimalakirti showed the truth itself, not another description of it. He showed what it actually is to rest in that space, before the mind divides reality into categories. This teaching speaks directly to the exhausted mind we've been exploring. That exhaustion comes largely from the constant activity of thinking, analyzing, comparing, evaluating, explaining, defending, justifying. The mind never stops its commentary, never stops trying to capture experience in concepts, never stops dividing the seamless flow of life into this versus that. Even when you try to rest, the thinking mind keeps working. It thinks about resting, evaluates whether you're resting correctly, wonders if this approach to rest is better than that approach, compares your rest to other people's rest. Vimalakirti's silence points to something available right now, in this moment, a way of being that precedes all that mental activity. Not unconsciousness, not blankness, but a vivid presence that exists before thought fragments it into pieces. Think about those rare moments when you've experienced this yourself. Maybe watching a sunset when suddenly you weren't thinking about the sunset, labeling its colors, comparing it to other sunsets. You were just there, fully present, the distinction between you and the beauty before you temporarily dissolved. Or perhaps holding a newborn child when all the thoughts about parenthood and responsibility and the future fell away, and there was just that perfect moment of connection, wordless and complete. Or standing in nature when the endless internal dialogue unexpectedly stopped and you found yourself simply breathing with the trees, existing in the same silence that holds mountains and streams. That's the space Vimalakirti was pointing toward, not as a special state you need to achieve, but as what's already here, when thought temporarily stops, constructing its version of reality. This isn't anti-intellectual. Words and concepts are useful tools for navigating the world, for communicating, for building understanding. But they're tools, not the truth itself. And the exhausted mind is often a mind that has forgotten this, that has come to believe the map is the territory, that has tried to live entirely in the realm of concepts and explanations. The Buddha himself spoke of this when he taught, "In the seen, there is only the seen. In the heard, only the heard. In the sensed, only the sensed. In the cognized, only the cognized." This points to direct experience before the mind adds its layers of interpretation, before it divides what's happening into self and other, pleasant and unpleasant, acceptable and unacceptable. Vimalakirti's teaching shows that sometimes the deepest wisdom isn't found in more thinking, more analysis, more explanation, but in the spacious silence that holds everything before thought divides it. The mind that can rest is the mind that has learned to touch this silence occasionally, to return to direct experience before the thinking mind turns it into problems and projects. This isn't about grand achievement or special attainment. It's simply about stopping, really stopping, even for a moment, and noticing what's here before you think about it. Sometimes the wisest response is no response at all. Sometimes the loudest teaching makes no sound. This isn't about grand achievement. Sometimes it's about stopping entirely. High in the mountains of Japan, in the late 18th century, there lived a monk who scandalized the religious establishment simply by being content. His name was Ryokan, and everything about his life seemed to contradict what a serious spiritual practitioner was supposed to be. He lived alone in a tiny hut, barely large enough to lie down in, perched on a mountainside, far from any monastery. He owned almost nothing: a robe, a begging bowl, a few writing materials. He had no students, no temple, no position of authority. He attended no important ceremonies and gave no formal teachings. Most of his days were spent doing things that seemed utterly ordinary, even pointless to those who believed spiritual practice should look impressive. He would play with children in the village below, bouncing a ball with them for hours. He would sit by a stream watching the water flow, writing simple poems about the moon or the sound of rain on leaves. He would beg for his food without any sense of shame or urgency, sometimes forgetting to eat if he became absorbed in watching a butterfly. When other monks visited his mountain retreat, they were often shocked by what they found. Here was a man who had received full monastic training, who clearly understood Buddhist teachings, yet who seemed to have abandoned all ambition for spiritual achievement. He didn't wake before dawn to meditate. He didn't engage in rigorous study of scriptures. He didn't push himself toward any goal at all. "You're wasting your life," one visiting monk told him bluntly. "You have the education and training to become an important teacher. You could lead a monastery, guide hundreds of students. Instead, you sit here playing with children and writing frivolous poems about flowers. This isn't serious practice. It's laziness dressed up as spirituality." Ryokan listened with a gentle smile. He offered the visitor tea, and they sat together, looking out at the mountains. After a long silence, Ryokan finally spoke. "When I was younger, I tried very hard to be a good monk," he said softly. "I woke early, sat long hours in meditation, studied scriptures until my eyes ached. I was determined to achieve enlightenment, to become someone worthy of respect. But the harder I tried, the more exhausted I became. And the more exhausted I became, the further I felt from any real peace." He poured more tea for his visitor. "Then one day I realized something strange. All that striving, it wasn't bringing me closer to understanding. It was the striving itself that was keeping me from what I was looking for. I was so busy trying to become enlightened that I couldn't see I was already complete. So busy trying to improve myself that I couldn't accept myself as I was. So busy reaching for the future that I was missing the only moment that actually exists." The visiting monk frowned. But without striving, without effort, how do you progress? How do you grow? How do you overcome your limitations? Ryokan gestured toward the window, where a bird was singing in a pine tree. Does that bird strive to be a better bird? Does it wake up each morning determined to improve its song, to overcome its bird limitations, to become something more than what it is? Or does it simply sing because that's what birds do, living fully in each moment, without the burden of becoming? This conversation captures something essential about Ryokan's teaching, though he would have bristled at calling it a teaching at all. He had discovered that the constant effort to improve yourself, to become better, to reach some future state of perfection, this very effort can become its own form of suffering. Think about the exhaustion that comes with the endless self-improvement project so many of us carry. You wake up and immediately start working on yourself. You need to meditate more mindfully, eat more healthfully, exercise more consistently, be more patient with your family, more productive at work, more present with your friends, more disciplined with your finances. You need to overcome your anxiety, heal your childhood wounds, develop better habits, break your bad patterns, optimize your sleep, manage your stress, improve your relationships. The list never ends, because as soon as you make progress in one area, you notice 10 other areas that need work. And underneath all this striving is an unspoken belief: I'm not okay as I am. I need to become something different before I can be at peace. Ryokan saw through this, not because he was against growth or learning or healing, but because he understood that the desperate quality of the striving, the sense that you're fundamentally broken and need fixing, actually prevents the very peace you're striving toward. He wrote in one of his poems, "Too lazy to be ambitious, I let the world take care of itself. 10 days worth of rice in my bag, a bundle of twigs by the fireplace. Why chatter about delusion and enlightenment? Listening to the night rain on my roof, I sit comfortably with both legs stretched out." That last image is significant. Sitting comfortably with both legs stretched out. In formal meditation, you're supposed to sit in a specific posture, spine straight, legs crossed, maintaining perfect alignment. Ryokan is literally and figuratively relaxing out of that rigid form, letting his body be comfortable, letting himself just be, without trying to be anything in particular. This isn't advocating for never making any effort or never trying to grow. Ryokan still practiced his calligraphy, still wrote his poems, still begged for his food. But there was a different quality to his actions. They came from acceptance rather than rejection, from contentment rather than lack, from presence rather than reaching towards some future achievement. The Buddha himself taught about this quality. He said, "Contentment is the greatest wealth." Confidence is the greatest friend. Freedom from craving is the greatest bliss. Notice that contentment comes first, not after you've fixed yourself, not after you've achieved your goals, not after you've become the person you think you should be. Contentment now, with things as they are, including yourself as you are. This is perhaps one of the most radical teachings available to the exhausted mind. What if you didn't need to improve yourself before you could be at peace? What if you could stop the endless self-improvement project, even temporarily, and just be exactly as you are right now? The resistance to this idea is immediate and strong. But I have real problems. I have genuine issues that need addressing. If I stop striving, if I just accept everything as it is, nothing will ever change. Ryokan would probably smile at that and point out the interesting contradiction. You think you need to hate yourself into becoming better. You think you need to reject what you are in order to become what you should be. You think the path to peace begins with declaring war on yourself. But has that actually worked? All that striving, all that effort to improve, has it brought you the peace you're looking for? Or has it just kept you in a constant state of not yet good enough, always reaching for the next achievement, the next breakthrough, the next version of yourself that you imagine will finally be acceptable? There's a story about Ryokan playing ball with village children one afternoon. He became so absorbed in the game that he forgot about the time, forgot about begging for his evening meal, forgot about everything except the simple joy of bouncing the ball back and forth. As the sun began to set, one of the children had to leave for home. Ryokan walked the child partway down the mountain path, and they continued playing as they walked, laughing and running after the ball together. When he returned to his hut that night, he had no food and no prospects for getting any until the next day. But his poem from that evening says simply, "Playing ball with the children, I forgot about my supper. Now it's dark and I'm hungry, but the moon is so beautiful through the pines." That's not spiritual bypassing or pretending problems don't exist. He was genuinely hungry. But he had the capacity to be present with what was actually happening. The hunger, yes, but also the beauty, the memory of joy with the children, the moonlight, without needing to make any of it wrong or different. This is the permission that exhausted minds often need most desperately. Permission to stop trying so hard. Permission to be imperfect without treating your imperfection as a crisis requiring immediate intervention. Permission to rest from the constant effort of becoming someone better, smarter, more accomplished, more spiritual, more healed. Ryokan showed that a life can be complete without being impressive. That you can be deeply content without achieving anything the world considers important. That there's a kind of wisdom in accepting your ordinariness instead of constantly trying to transcend it. In his simple mountain hut, with almost nothing to his name, He was perhaps one of the freest people of his time. Free not because he'd achieved some special state, but because he'd stopped exhausting himself, trying to be anything other than exactly what he was. The visiting monks often left his hut confused, even frustrated. They wanted a teaching they could grasp, a practice they could implement, a path they could follow to become like him. But Ryokan had no method to offer, no steps to enlightenment, no program for self-improvement. He simply lived, moment by moment, with a contentment that needed nothing from the future and held no regret about the past. His laziness, which scandalized the ambitious monks, was actually a profound form of wisdom, the wisdom to stop doing and just be. Even the most repetitive task can become a doorway when you stop trying to use it to get somewhere else and simply allow it to be what it is. At a temple called Ryoanji, there was a monk whose entire life revolved around a single task. Every morning at dawn, every evening at dusk, and at specific intervals throughout the day, his job was to ring the temple bell. That was it. No teaching students, no leading ceremonies, no administrative duties, no scholarly pursuits. Just the bell. He would climb the wooden steps to the bell tower, grasp the thick rope attached to the wooden striker, pull it back with both hands, and let it swing forward to strike the massive bronze surface. The sound would roll out across the temple grounds, across the gardens, across the village below, marking the passage of time for everyone who heard it. This monk, whose name has been lost to history, which seems somehow appropriate, performed this task for 30 years. 30 years of the same motion, the same sound, the same few steps, up to the bell tower and back down again. When young monks first arrived at the temple, they would often watch him with a mixture of pity and relief. Pity because they couldn't imagine anything more monotonous, more mind-numbing, more spiritually deadening than doing the exact same simple task for decades. Relief because at least they hadn't been assigned such a boring position. They were there to study profound teachings, to engage in intensive meditation, to wrestle with difficult questions about the nature of reality and consciousness. The bell ringer, they assumed, had been given this role because he wasn't capable of anything more demanding. But the older monks knew something different. They had watched the bell ringer over the years and noticed something that the newcomers couldn't yet see. There was a quality to how he moved toward the bell each time. Not rushed, not reluctant, not mechanical, despite the countless repetitions. He climbed those steps, as if climbing them for the first time, as if each step mattered, as if this particular ringing was the only one that had ever existed or ever would. When he grasped the rope, there was no sense of, "Here we go again," or "Just get through it." His hands found the rope with a kind of quiet attention, as if he were meeting an old friend, rather than performing a chore. He pulled it back not too far, and not too little, finding that perfect point through feel, rather than measurement. And when the striker hit the bell, the sound that emerged was somehow different from what you'd expect from such a routine task. It wasn't just noise marking time. It was a voice speaking into the moment, clear and pure, with no residue of boredom or resentment or mechanical repetition. One day, a visiting teacher arrived at the temple, a scholar known throughout the region for his vast knowledge of Buddhist philosophy. He spent several days engaged in deep discussions with the temple's head monk, exploring subtle points of doctrine and practice. On his last morning, as he prepared to leave, he heard the dawn bell ring. Something in that sound stopped him. He stood perfectly still, listening as the reverberations gradually faded into silence. "Who rings your bell?" he asked the head monk. "Just one of our monks," the head monk replied. "He's been doing it for many years." The visiting scholar was quiet for a moment. "I would like to meet him," he said. They found the bell ringer in the garden, raking leaves with the same quality of attention he brought to the bell. The scholar bowed respectfully and asked, "How long have you been ringing the temple bell?" 30 years, the bell ringer replied simply. 30 years of the same task, the same motion, the same sound, the scholar said, thoughtfully. "Tell me, have you found this practice difficult? Boring? Do you long for something more challenging, more meaningful?" The bell ringer smiled gently. "In the beginning, yes," he said. "When I was first given this task, my mind rebelled against it. I thought it was beneath me, that I was capable of more important work. I rang the bell while my mind was somewhere else entirely, planning my future, replaying the past, imagining the impressive spiritual accomplishments I could be achieving if only I were free from this tedious duty." He paused, looking at the rake in his hands. But gradually, something shifted. I began to notice that when my mind wandered away from the actual task, when I was thinking about other things while ringing the bell, the sound was different. Duller somehow, less clear. And I began to notice that in those rare moments when I was completely present with the action, when there was just the reaching for the rope, the pulling, the striking, the sound, in those moments, my mind was perfectly quiet. Not empty, but quiet. Not striving, but complete. The scholar leaned forward, deeply interested. "Go on," he said. "I realize something," the bell ringer continued. "Other monks sit in the meditation hall trying to quiet their minds, trying to stop their thoughts, trying to reach some special state. They work very hard at it, often struggling for years. But I discovered that when I gave myself completely to ringing the bell, when there was nothing held back, no part of me resisting or wishing to be somewhere else, the thinking mind quieted on its own. Not because I was trying to quiet it, but because I was so fully absorbed in what I was doing that there was no room left for mental chatter. He set down the rake and demonstrated the motion with his hands, as if pulling the bell rope. Each time I ring the bell now, it's not repetition at all. This ringing has never happened before. This exact moment, this exact quality of attention, this exact sound emerging into this exact morning, it's completely new. How could something that's never happened before be boring? The scholar sat with this for a long moment. Finally, he said, "In all my years of study, I've read countless texts about one pointed concentration, about absorption, about the mind that rests in the present moment. But I've never met someone who embodied these teachings so completely without even trying to embody them." The bell ringer laughed softly. "That's the strange thing," he said. "I'm not trying to be one-pointed. I'm not trying to be absorbed. I'm not trying to live in the present moment. I'm just ringing the bell, completely, with everything I am. And somehow that simple act contains everything the complicated teachings point toward." This story reveals something crucial about how the mind finds rest. We often think repetitive tasks are the enemy of presence, that they numb the mind and turn us into automatons. We believe that spiritual practice requires variety, intensity, constant challenge, and growth. But the bell ringer discovered something different. He found that repetition, when met with complete attention, can actually quiet the restless mind more effectively than any technique designed specifically for that purpose. Think about your own life and the tasks you do repeatedly. Washing dishes, folding laundry, commuting to work, preparing meals, brushing your teeth. How often are you actually present with these actions? How often is your mind somewhere else entirely, planning, worrying, remembering, imagining, while your body goes through motions it's performed 1,000 times before? That absence, that split between action and attention, is exhausting. You're never quite where you are, never quite doing what you're doing. Part of you is always elsewhere, and that division drains energy even from the simplest tasks. The bell ringer showed another way. He showed that the most ordinary, repetitive action can become a doorway to the very peace and presence that people search for in complicated spiritual practices. The Buddha himself taught about this quality of wholehearted engagement. He said, "Whatever you are doing, whether standing or walking, sitting or lying down, keep your mind attentive. Diligence is the path to the deathless. Heedlessness is the path to death. The diligent do not die. The heedless are as if already dead." That diligence isn't about forcing yourself to concentrate. It's about bringing your whole self to whatever you're doing, however simple or ordinary it might seem. When you wash a dish with your complete attention, feeling the warm water, noticing the slickness of soap, seeing the plate become clean, that action is as sacred as any formal meditation. When you walk to your car fully present with each step, feeling your feet touch the ground, sensing the air on your skin, that's as profound as any mountain retreat. The bell ringer rang his bell 30,000 times, give or take. Each one different, because each moment is different. Each one complete, because he was complete in doing it. He never wrote any books, never gave any formal teachings, never trained any students in special techniques. But visitors to that temple would sometimes stand in the courtyard at dawn or dusk, waiting to hear the bell, because there was something in that sound that spoke of a mind completely at rest, while completely engaged. The young monks eventually understood why the old monks treated the bell ringer with such respect. He hadn't been given that task because he wasn't capable of more important work. He'd been given that task because few people are capable of doing one simple thing completely, day after day, year after year, without their minds fragmenting it into boredom or elevating it into something it's not. In that single repeated action, he'd found what others spend lifetimes seeking through complex practices and teachings. Not because the action was special, but because he'd learned to be completely present with it. And finally, the longest journey ends where it began, right here, right now, in the simple act of doing what you're doing. There was a monk named Dongshan who devoted his entire life to finding enlightenment. For years he traveled from teacher to teacher, monastery to monastery, mountain to mountain, always searching for that elusive understanding that would finally make him complete. He studied with masters who taught through silence, and masters who taught through words. He practiced meditation in caves and monasteries, by rivers and on mountaintops. He read every teaching he could find, memorized sutras, debated philosophy with other monks. He pushed himself through exhaustion, through doubt, through countless moments of thinking he was close, only to realize he still felt exactly the same, incomplete, unfinished, not yet there. Where is this enlightenment? He would ask his teachers. How do I find what I'm looking for? Each teacher pointed him in a new direction, gave him a new practice, showed him a new way to search. And each time, Dongshan threw himself into it with complete dedication, certain that this time he would finally find what had been eluding him. But the years passed, and the feeling of seeking never left him. Always there was this sense of being close but not quite there, of understanding something important but not quite grasping it fully. always there was this gnawing feeling that everyone else might have found what he was looking for, while he remained forever on the outside looking in. Finally, exhausted and discouraged, Dongshan decided to visit one last teacher who lived on a remote mountain. Perhaps this teacher would be the one who could finally show him the way. The journey to the mountain was long and difficult. Dongshan walked for days through forests and valleys, his body tired, his mind churning with questions. What if this teacher couldn't help him either? What if he'd wasted his entire life searching for something that didn't exist? What if he simply wasn't capable of enlightenment? On the last day of his journey, as he approached the mountain where the teacher lived, Dongshan came to a stream he needed to cross. It was a calm day, the water moving slowly over smooth stones, reflecting the sky above. He stepped into the stream carefully, feeling for solid footing on the rocks below the surface. The water came up to his shins, cold and clear. As he paused to find his next step, he happened to glance down at the water. And there, looking back at him from the surface of the stream, was his own face. It was just his reflection, nothing special or unusual about it. The same face he'd seen countless times in mirrors and ponds. But in that moment, something shifted. He suddenly saw with perfect clarity what he'd been doing all these years. He'd been searching everywhere for enlightenment, in teachings, in practices, in monasteries, in the words of masters, while the one who was searching, the one who was asking questions, the one who wanted to be enlightened, was right here all along. He'd been looking for his own face everywhere, except in the mirror. The Buddha nature he'd been seeking wasn't something he needed to acquire or achieve or earn through years of practice. It was what he was looking with, not what he was looking for. It was the awareness that had been present through every moment of seeking, through every practice, through every question and doubt. In that instant, standing in the stream with water flowing around his legs and his own face looking back at him, the entire journey revealed itself as unnecessary. Not because it had been a waste, but because what he'd been searching for had never been absent. He'd been like someone frantically searching for their glasses while wearing them, looking everywhere except at the simple fact of already seeing. Dongshan stood there in the stream for a long time, neither moving forward to continue his journey to the teacher, nor turning back. There was nowhere to go, because there was nothing missing. No enlightenment to find because awareness was already present. No completion to achieve because he'd never actually been incomplete. When he eventually did visit the teacher on the mountain, he told him what had happened at the stream. The old teacher smiled and said, "You finally stopped seeking the seeker. You finally saw that the one looking for Buddha nature is Buddha nature looking for itself." This is what I would have told you if you'd asked, but you had to discover it yourself. This teaching speaks directly to the exhaustion we've been exploring throughout these stories. So much of that exhaustion comes from the sense that something is missing, that you're incomplete as you are, that peace or happiness or freedom lies somewhere other than right here. Think about how tiring it is to constantly seek, to always be working on yourself, fixing yourself, improving yourself, trying to become someone who has finally arrived at some imaginary destination where everything will be okay. The seeking itself creates the sense of lack. As long as you're looking for something, you reinforce the belief that you don't have it. As long as you're trying to become enlightened, you're confirming the story that you're not enlightened right now. The search for peace becomes the very thing that prevents you from noticing the peace that's already here. This doesn't mean you should stop learning or growing or working on practical problems in your life. It means something much more subtle. It means recognizing that the awareness that's reading these words right now, the consciousness that's present in this moment, that's not something broken or incomplete that needs fixing. The Buddha taught, all beings are by nature Buddha, as ice, by nature, is water. Apart from water, there is no ice. Apart from beings, no Buddha. You're not trying to become something you're not. You're trying to recognize what you already are beneath all the stories about being insufficient, incomplete, not good enough, not there yet. When Dongshan saw his reflection in the stream, he wasn't discovering something new. He was simply seeing what had been true all along, but obscured by the very act of searching for it somewhere else. This is perhaps the most exhausting irony of the spiritual search. You're already what you're looking for, but the looking itself prevents you from recognizing it. You're already home, but you keep planning elaborate journeys to find home. You're already whole, but you keep gathering pieces to complete yourself. The moment the search stops isn't usually dramatic. It's not necessarily accompanied by bliss or visions or cosmic experiences. It's more like Dongshan looking down and simply seeing his own face, obvious, present, undeniable. For a moment, the seeking mind takes a breath. The exhausting story of not yet there pauses. And in that pause, there's just this awareness, being aware, presence being present, life happening exactly as it is, without the burden of needing to be anything else. This doesn't solve all your problems or make difficult emotions disappear, or turn your life into something perfect. But it does relieve you of the exhausting belief that you need to become fundamentally different before you can be okay. You might still work on things, make changes, grow, and learn. But it comes from a different place, not from desperate lack, but from simple appropriateness, not from self-rejection, but from self-acceptance that sees clearly what needs attention. Dongshan never forgot that moment in the stream. In later years, when students came to him seeking enlightenment, He would sometimes take them to cross a stream and ask them to look down into the water. "Who do you see?" he would ask. "Just my reflection," they would answer. "Keep looking," he would say. And occasionally, one of them would suddenly understand what Dongshan had understood that day, that they were looking at the seeker, that the one asking, "Who am I?" is the answer to the question, that the journey to find themselves ends the moment they stop looking elsewhere and simply recognize what's been looking all along. The longest journey does end where it began. Not because you've gone in a circle and wasted your time, but because you've finally recognized that what you traveled so far to find was never actually somewhere else. The exhausted mind can finally rest when it sees this. Not because all seeking and striving stops forever, but because the desperate quality of it dissolves. You're no longer running from a sense of fundamental wrongness towards some imagined state of finally being okay. You're already what you've been looking for. You always have been. The face in the water has been your face all along. And so we come full circle. "12 stories, 12 doorways, all opening onto the same truth, what the ancient teachers called no mind. Not a mind that's empty or blank, but a mind that's finally stopped its exhausting work of thinking about thinking, analyzing experience, judging every moment, constantly trying to fix itself. The monk who swept for 40 years found no mind in repetition. The imprisoned king found it in patience. Vimalakirti found it in silence. The bell ringer found it in complete presence with one simple task. Each story showed the same teaching from a different angle. Your thinking mind can rest when you stop forcing it to make everything into a problem that needs solving. This state of no mind isn't something you achieve through effort. It's what naturally appears when the constant mental commentary finally takes a breath. It's been here all along, quietly present beneath the noise of thinking. The Buddha said it simply, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." Your thinking mind can rest now. Not forever, not perfectly, but right now, in this moment. These stories were simply pointing you toward what's already here, when thought stops dividing everything into what should be versus what is. From all of us at Moon Mind Temple, thank you for this quiet time together. May you discover no mind not as something far away, but as close as your next breath. The thinking stops. The mind rests. Peace remains. Sleep well.